In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Today's episode is going to be incredibly interesting because while I was writing it, I encountered many challenging questions. This episode is about the second journey of Dhul-Qarnayn, which begins from verse 89 of Surah Kahf, where it says that Dhul-Qarnayn once again set out on a path until he reached the place where the sun rises and saw it rising over a people for whom we had provided no shelter from it. And so it was, and we fully understood the matter. What do you understand from these three verses? Dhul-Qarnayn has moved away from the location with the boiling spring that we discussed in the previous episode and has now reached a place where the sun is rising, not setting into a spring. And here, Dhul-Qarnayn encountered people who had no protection from the sun. There was no barrier or shield between them and the sun. But then, Allah tells us something very important. And so it was, and we fully understood the matter. Why did Allah say this? As I mentioned earlier, this episode is perhaps the most challenging for me because it contains some very difficult questions. But before I address those questions, first, let me tell you about the prevailing theories regarding this second journey of Dhul-Qarnayn, so that when I give you my explanation, you will easily understand where this journey actually took place. And since the Quran refers to this second location as the place where the sun rises, throughout this episode, I will refer to it as such. The most popular concept regarding Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey is that he traveled eastward. The reason for this belief is that since this journey mentions the place where the sun rises, it is presumed that this location would be in the east. Some also suggest that Dhul-Qarnayn might have reached the coasts of Makran or traveled to the plains of China and Tibet, and the explanation for the people there being unable to protect themselves from the sun is that perhaps they did not know how to build shelters, and so they were unable to protect themselves from the sun. Today, I will first analyze this theory for you. Whether human or animal, it is a natural instinct to seek shelter under trees or in caves to escape the sun's heat, and the oldest human dwellings were mountain caves. Caves were used for shelter even before the Neanderthals, the beings who lived on this earth before humans. Although they lived on Earth for 400,000 years, they still lacked the intelligence to produce the sound noon. Neanderthals were a very basic form of human beings, and although they were much less intelligent than Homo sapiens, humans, they still used caves to seek shelter from rain, storms, sunlight, or wild animals. We know this because traces of smoke from fires are present on the walls of caves that are 800,000 years old, indicating that someone used to light fires and sleep in those caves. Even animals understand how to seek shelter in caves, and whether on the coasts of Makran or in the plains of Tibet and China, our entire eastern board is not devoid of places where one can find shelter from the sun. The entire eastern part of the world is filled with mountains, forests, caves, and rocks. Therefore, we can immediately dismiss the concept that Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey took him towards Tibet or Makran. However, there is another theory, that holds some weight, suggesting that Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey took place in regions of the world where the sun does not set at all. And in this part of the episode, I will tell you about these locations. There are places in our world where the concept of day and night is very different from the rest of the world. These are places where, unlike Pakistan, India, or Bangladesh, where the day lasts for 13 or 14 hours and the night for 8 or 10 hours, in summer, there are days when the sun never sets. For example, in Canada's Yukon Territory, or parts of Iceland, or in areas of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, these countries are located near the poles of our world, where the concept of day and night is slightly different from the rest of the world. I will tell you about a city in Russia which is still inhabited with a population of 270,000 people. And I personally have a connection with this city. The city's name is Murmansk, and in Murmansk there comes a time when the sun does not set. For 63 days straight, even at midnight, the sun is visible. This is a fascinating and beautiful phenomenon, known as the midnight sun or white nights. People put up blackout blinds on their windows to block the sunlight from entering their homes. Besides this, there are also places in our world where the sun rises only once a year and sets only once a year, such as the Svalbard region in Norway and the North and South poles of our world. And I'm sure you've all learned something about the poles in school. One day lasting 6 months and one night lasting 6 months. So is it possible that Dhul-Qarnayn traveled to one of these locations? No, it is unlikely, because Allah clearly stated that Dhul-Qarnayn reached the place where the sun rises, and all the locations I've mentioned are either in the north or the far south of our world. None of these places are eastward, nor do they meet the description of the place where the sun rises. But more than that, during my research for this series, I studied the maps and topography of all these regions, the physical features of the land, including where the mountains, plains, caves, and rivers are located, and I concluded that in all these regions, there are not only abundant places to seek shelter from the sun, like trees, forests, caves, and rivers, but there are also mountains so enormous that we may never have seen their like in our entire lives. Do you know that some people today think that perhaps Dhul-Qarnayn traveled to Alaska, an American state? These people believe this because some areas of Alaska also experience 6 months of daylight and 6 months of darkness. But do you know that there are a total of 20,000 mountains in America, of which 17,000 are in Alaska alone? These mountains are filled with forests, caves, and valleys, while the Quran clearly tells us that the people in the place where the sun rises could not escape the sun. I told you, didn't I? To prepare for this episode, I confronted myself with very challenging questions, pushing my intellect to its limits. One of those challenging questions was about a theory that is currently considered the most credible. Did Dhul-Qarnayn really travel to that part of the world which is the most isolated and distant, our South Pole, the frozen continent, Antarctica, a frozen world discovered just 200 years ago, spanning over 14 million square kilometers, a place where the cold is so extreme that daytime temperatures can drop to minus 70 degrees, and at night it can plummet to minus 80 degrees Celsius. The continent where the fastest winds on Earth, known as katabatic winds, blow. A continent where no life form, other than penguins or leopard seals, can survive. Only about 1,000 people live there, and they reside in extremely expensive, specially designed makeshift homes to protect them from the brutal cold. Without such protection, Antarctica's deadly chill would claim their lives within seconds. And these are not ordinary people. They are scientists conducting research in Antarctica. They stay there for a maximum of 1 year before returning home. This is why Antarctica was discovered so late, because it was not easy to reach. Ice-cold winds and treacherous frozen waves made it incredibly difficult. After months of perilous journeying, it was only possible to reach Antarctica. And even then, if someone managed to reach there, survival in such extreme cold was nearly impossible. This is why Antarctica remains one of the least explored regions in the world, and many believe that it might be the place where Dhul-Qarnayn arrived during his second journey. Now, here's something interesting. If we momentarily ignore the notion of the place where the sun rises, Antarctica could indeed be the location of Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey. And how so? 44% of Antarctica is made up of ice shelves, massive sheets of ice floating on the ocean. These could be the very ice sheets on which a person standing there might be unable to escape the sun. These ice sheets have no trees, no vegetation, no homes could be built, and no walls or roofs could be erected to shelter from the sun. These ice sheets in Antarctica could have been an ideal place for Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey. This challenging question took a lot of effort to answer, and I finally arrived at the answer. There is only one reason that weakens the Antarctica theory, and that is the map of Antarctica. A mountain range, known as the Transantarctic Mountains, cuts across this frozen world right through its center. This range stretches for 3,500 kilometers across Antarctica, with countless caves within these mountains that could offer protection from the sun. And these are no small mountains. The tallest peak, Mount Kirkpatrick, stands at 4.5 kilometers high, with dozens of natural caves providing refuge from the sun. But as I mentioned, to prepare for this episode, I pushed my intellect to its limits and asked myself, what if these mountains did not exist when Dhul-Qarnayn arrived? Because mountains are formed and destroyed over time, as we all know. Mountains can be created by earthquakes or by the collision of Earth's tectonic plates. So, it is possible that the Transantarctic mountain range formed after Dhul-Qarnayn's arrival. I studied the orology of these mountains very carefully and concluded that this is not possible. Do you know when the Transantarctic mountains were formed? Back when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth, between 65 and 70 million years ago, long before humans ever existed. This means that caves and mountains have definitely existed in Antarctica for millions of years, providing shelter from the sun. These are all the reasons why it seems that Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey may not have taken place in this world, because there are no features in this world where one could not find shelter from the sun. And now, what I am about to tell you will strongly support my theory. Almost all classical or first-generation Muslim scholars have mentioned this. This includes Qatada, Salma, and Hassan. May Allah have mercy on them. This was also stated by the 9th century scholar Ibn Jarir. May Allah have mercy on him, one of the earliest commentators of the Quran. And now, I want you to listen to this very carefully. According to these scholars, when Dhul-Qarnayn embarked on his second journey and reached the place where the sun rises, he found people living there, people who were like savages. The 13th century scholar Zahir al-Din al-Awfi also wrote in his book, Lub al-Lubab, that these people had faces like dogs with sharp teeth, resembling those of canines. Their diet mostly consisted of fish, and if one of them died, they would eat the body. Lub al-Din, may Allah have mercy on him, also mentioned that these people were almost unaware of clothing, wearing only enough to cover their private parts. Hassan, may Allah have mercy on him, said that these people would retreat into caves and water during the day to escape the sun, and would emerge at night to hunt for food, spreading out like animals. Their skin was red. Dhul-Qarnayn saw a pile of gleaming bones there and asked the people what they were. They replied that these were the bones of people who had come here before you. And when they stayed until sunrise, they died. These bones belong to those people. Upon hearing this, Dhul-Qarnayn left the place. These are all very important details, especially the fact that these people had red skin. This detail will become very significant later, and I will return to it. The scholars I've mentioned were not contemporary scholars whose theories we could dismiss as new. They were first-generation Muslim scholars, classical scholars. And as I explained Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey, you will see how each detail given by these scholars fits perfectly. Who were these people? Where was this place? Why did they have canine-like teeth and elongated faces? Why did they primarily eat fish and even consume their dead? And most importantly, why was their skin red? I am emphasizing again that you must keep the detail about the red skin in mind. By the way, I have a question for you. Does any nation or group of people in this world today exhibit these features? From America to Japan, there are currently 223 nationalities in the world, many of which you've seen on TV. But have you ever seen any national ill with canine-like faces, sharp teeth, who wear only enough clothing to cover their private parts, and whose skin is red? The answer to all these questions lies in just one word in the verse, Mata al-Shams, the place where the sun rises. Once you understand this word, the mystery of Dhul-Qarnayn's second journey will be fully revealed to you. What is Mata al-Shams? What is this place where the sun rises? What is the sun? The sun is a star. In fact, every star is a sun. You can understand it this way. Stars are suns that are far away from us, and the sun is a star that is very close to us. But let me clarify one thing. If the sun is a star, then why does Allah refer to it as Shams and the others as Nujum? Shams is the name of this star, just as in Surah Najm, Allah names a star, Shira. Perhaps you remember that a few months ago, I made a video on Shira, why Allah mentions this star in the Quran. But let's get back to the topic. The sun is a star. Now, you may remember that in the previous episode, I explained about black holes where entire suns are swallowed, and that Dhul-Qarnayn's first journey took him to a place where a sun was sinking into this dark abyss, this black vortex. But in our universe, there are places that create, instead of consume, even suns. And one of these places is called a nebula. Clouds of glowing gas where suns and other stars like our sun are born. Perhaps our sun was also born in such a nebula once. And this is what Mata al-Shams is, the place where suns begin to shine, where Allah's magnificent creation begins. I am amazed at this divine masterpiece, how clouds of gas in space gather together in one place. I am in awe of how within these clouds, a thermonuclear fusion as hot as the furnace of hell begins, igniting the clouds, and a sun is born. But there are some very interesting things about the birth of this sun, and I want you to listen to this information very carefully. When a sun is born, when it starts burning, when it begins to shine, at that time, it burns at 15 million degrees Celsius. Inside it, fusion is constantly occurring. Fusion is the secret of the sun's power, and from this fusion, immense energy is constantly being released. One of these energies is called radiation, and radiation is the key to the second journey of Dhul-Qarnayn. The people living near the rising sun were facing the dreadful radiation of their sun. The rising sun was a planet located near a nebula, a planet that was being bombarded by the terrible radiation of a newly born sun nearby. This was a condition that the people couldn't escape. Listen carefully, because this matter is about to get even more interesting. Their sun was doing the same thing that all suns do. Even our own sun produces radiation, but we are protected from it. And how? I am amazed at the work of that divine entity, how it has wrapped a kind of cloth around our world, a protective layer, a layer that we have all heard about since our childhood, the ozone layer. This layer of ours blocks 77% of the sun's radiation before it reaches us. And I'm not talking about ordinary radiation. I am talking about ultraviolet radiation, which is hotter than ordinary heat. But what if this radiation reaches us? There is a whole field of science dedicated to the effects of radiation called radiobiology, which studies how radiation can affect life. The most work in this field has been done by the Aachen University in Germany. This university has created the largest database on the effects of radiation. It contains 6,500 articles and summaries that discuss what our lives would be like if the sun's radiation reached us. I have read as many articles from this database as I could, and now I will tell you that if the sun's radiation reaches us, 3 things will happen: genetic damage, genetic mutations, and cancer. Our bodies would mutate from the worst kind of radiation. Our appearances would mutate into those of animals or monsters. Our teeth would mutate and our skin would turn red due to sunburn. We would search for places to hide in caves under the water and the earth to escape from the sun. Nothing would grow on the surface of our world due to the extreme heat, and our food would only come from what grows underwater. There would be such shortage of food that we might turn to cannibalism, just as Dhul-Qarnayn saw the people living near the rising sun. If we too fall under the influence of this radiation, we would burn to ashes, and only our shiny bones would remain, just like the piles of shiny bones that Dhul-Qarnayn saw on that planet. And as soon as Dhul-Qarnayn realized that they wouldn't be able to block or stop the sun's radiation once it rose, they immediately left the place, and that is why it says in verse 91, "And so it was, and we had full knowledge of what he had." We knew Dhul-Qarnayn's capabilities and the extent of his resources. We knew what he could do and what he couldn't. We were aware of all his affairs. A very powerful imagination has been bestowed upon us, and you know that when I was writing this episode, every scene was playing before my eyes. How Dhul-Qarnayn might have appeared in a barren and desolate world at night, where savage creatures and beings with dog-like faces were roaming, emerging from the waters, watching the two-horned man appear. And how, as soon as Dhul-Qarnayn realized that there was little time left before the sun would rise and rain down the worst kind of radiation on that planet, he immediately prepared to leave. Imagining those scenes is just amazing. Simply amazing. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. You saw how those people were suffering from the worst radiation of their newly born son, and why. Verse 90 clearly states the reason. We had provided no shelter from it. There was no such thing as an ozone layer in their world. At this point, I want to share something with you. In this verse, Allah uses a very special word, satra. This word can mean any of the following: protection, cover, shelter, or something that shields. But this word also has another very special meaning, which is veil. I just told you about the ozone layer that protects us from the sun's radiation. But besides ozone, there is something else that acts as a kind of veil between us and this radiation, and that is Earth's magnetic field. Without getting into too many technical details, I will explain in the simplest terms. Inside our Earth, molten iron is moving in all directions, and due to this movement, a kind of shield forms around our Earth, which is invisible to us, but acts like a veil that protects our Earth. I mentioned earlier that just like all suns, our sun also undergoes highly powerful fusion at all times. And because of this fusion, occasionally our sun emits extremely dangerous energy waves. And do you know what these waves did to Mars? Mars at one time was a planet similar to our world. Once Mars also had water, but it did not have the protective veil of a magnetic field. As a result, the sun's dreadful waves tore apart Mars's ozone layer, which is why nothing has grown on Mars since. These solar waves take only 2 days to reach our Earth, but our magnetic field, our veil, our satra, is so powerful, so incredibly powerful, that it even withstands these solar waves and prevents us from becoming like Mars. It saves us from becoming like those people who used to hide underwater during the day and whose world had no satra, no protection. It saves us from becoming like those people who couldn't escape the sun. Before completing this episode and discussing Dhul-Qarnayn's third journey, I want to ask you a question. My question is in 4 surahs. Surah Ibrahim, who is he who created the heavens and the earth with a perfect design? Surah Fatir, who is he who holds up the heavens and the earth lest they collapse? Az-Zariyat, who is he who made the earth habitable? And who is the most beautiful of creators? At-Tagabun, who is he who created the earth with the utmost balance? And who made your forms so beautiful, and to whom you will all return? Place your hand on your heart and seek the answer to this question, and whatever name your heart tells you, pray for me with that name. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Insha'Allah, now I will take you to the third journey where Dhul-Qarnayn built the wall of Gog and Magog, and I will show you that wall in the next episode, Insha'Allah. Allah Hafiz.